right, Leadheads. I hope you guys are doing well. It is a lovely Wednesday evening, and we're getting ready to have a really power-packed talk with my good friend Paul Frederick, who has come back after being the first guest of the Pencil Pushers podcast. Welcome, Paul. How are you?
Good to be back.
Yeah, awesome, man. Paul and I were talking earlier about hopefully not missing the opportunity to talk about where to find each of the artists at the top of the episode. So I'm going to roll it out to you, Paul. Why don't you go ahead and tell us where we can find you first off so people can start staring at your stuff while we're talking.
The greatest place would be go over to Instagram, and the handle is paulfrederick.net, and it's all spelled out. Paul Frederick is FREDRICHDOTNET. Start there, and then you can find other places.
Awesome. So I've been thinking about this for a little while, this topic that I want to talk about, and I really think it's important for anybody who's trying to get into basically being an independent artist. And so I feel like this topic could be transcended beyond specific industries. I think it really speaks to anybody who wants to get into the creative field as an independent creative.
For sure.
And so what I want to talk about in this episode is how to be an independent artist and be successful at it. And when I was talking to Paul about this, I immediately thought of you, because you are literally an encyclopedia of information when it comes to being an independent artist. And in terms of resource, I mean, you have so much knowledge in you. It's just incredible. So I thought of you immediately when I thought we could do a topic like this.
The plan is working.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what you were thinking about, which was sort of similar to what this topic is.
My topic, or the book that I'm working on and the panel discussion for comic book conventions, is how to make it in comics without really making it in comics. And just really some of the avenues that used to be there for cartoonists, like newspapers, magazines, are disappearing. And where do you go now if you want to be a cartoonist? And you have to make it for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I put together a list of 9 tips or questions that I'm going to kind of run through with you, Paul. And maybe we can just kind of run through them, and hopefully we can make it within an hour.
For cash prizes? For
cash prizes, exactly. The first thing that I want to get out of the way is, number 1, getting rid of the starving artist mentality. I feel like that's just incredibly important that we break that wheel. Can I ask you a little bit about your perception of that, your perspective of that, and how do you feel one goes about doing that?
Yes. That's a good one on the internet. A lot of artists and musicians and photographers, other creative people, are starting to fight for the perception. One, artists shouldn't just give away their art. It's fine to post on social media, but you have a lot of people come to you and like, I need a flyer for a band. Can you do it for free? You get exposure. Yeah. Exposure is the word that everybody dreads, or it doesn't exist. Get paid for your work. If somebody changes your tire at the car shop, they get paid.
Yeah.
You're doing work. It's not sweaty. It's not labor intensive. Unless it is. But it has value.
Yeah.
And so you need to get something in return for it. So the starving artist it's a romantic thought, but you've got to run it like a business. And you got to treat it like a business. You've got to let people know that you're creating something that no one else is creating. I've had chefs, I've had people in the military or firemen or teachers, people I really respect. And often they'll say, and I don't believe this is true, but they'll say, like, anybody could be a doctor. Mm-hmm. They're doing something that you can be trained to do.
Right.
For an artist, musician, or an actor, anybody, you're using creative talents to take something that doesn't exist and make it your own. So it should be treated like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the trickiest parts, an artist typically is not a templated thing. You have a very unique set of skill sets.
Right.
And so being able to get out there and start making money and proving yourself is not the same thing as like I have a diploma as being from being a doctor, and therefore there's an expectation that I'm going to have a service that is equal to this amount of money. When it comes to being an artist, it's an independent thing. Your own artwork is very unique to you. So how do you break that mold of saying, well, my art is worth the same amount or whatever it is you feel it is, right?
So I took my lessons from musicians. I knew more musicians than artists. And if you're in a band, you have to go out and play. You have to get people to see your stuff and see you play and hear your music and build on that. So my first step was using my paintings and exhibiting them in coffee shops and cafes and restaurants and eventually galleries, and then creating people wanting to see more. So I did paintings based on my comic strips from panels from the book, and people wanted to know more. What's the story behind that? Mm-hmm. And then I had the story, and then people liked the story, and they wanted to express that, so I started making T-shirts.
Yeah.
So I found an avenue to get my stuff to the public's view.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it actually rolls a little bit into my second point, which is about learning about business and thinking about yourself as an entrepreneur.
Yes.
So obviously you have a very entrepreneur type perspective. Like you're basically a go-getter. You use your art to actually produce products that people come to expect, and there's this demand that starts to increase because of the fact that you're putting yourself out there more and more and more. So would you say that this is an incredibly important part of kind of building yourself up as an independent artist?
You have to know how to hustle. The thing I learned and read from other artists is the sad fact is if you want to do this full time for yourself, about 75% of the actual work is not making art. It's going out there and hustling. It's calling people, sending emails, producing products, and it takes up all the time that you just want to sit there and make up stuff.
Yeah. And how do you find the inspiration to do the work that's not necessarily the creative part?
The key for me is remembering if I don't do this work, then I don't get to make my cartoons. If I worked for a graphics company or a advertising agency, all my time would be spent doing their work. And likely what would happen is at the end of the day, I'd have other things I had to take care of. I'd be too tired, and I wouldn't have time to do what I want to do. So in order to do what I want to do, I have to do the stuff that makes that happen.
Do you find that there's a shift in perspective for you too, in terms of like finding ways to enjoy the process that isn't necessarily the creative part?
That's where coming in, like keeping your eye on the prize.
Yeah.
Going to the post office and mailing a bunch of stuff, checking the paperwork on eBay and Etsy and through Instagram and other avenues for sales keeps me from having to go look for a job.
An interesting point that was made when I interviewed Lisa Congdon a few weeks back was this idea of kind of similarly to what you're saying, which is keeping your eye on the prize, looking at the long view and working your way back. And in some ways, leading into the third point, which I think is really important, your eye on the prize is really it's a long-term goal, right? You're looking at
Right.
the long view. You're not
Yes.
looking for quick highs. You know what I mean? Like quick returns. I mean, obviously that's great to have, but in
Unfortunately, that's very true.
right, right. So you're looking at the long view, and in essence, and we've talked about this before. One of the most important parts is this idea of, okay, yes, becoming an entrepreneur, but the next higher level of that is becoming a brand, right?
Exactly.
And that to me is sort of the long view perspective of having a career rather than a job, and looking at it more as a career than a job. So this is a lifelong pursuit, and therefore I'm going to build into that almost.
Yes. It took me several years into my career to really identify that. For a long time, I stood behind the success of my cartoon characters. Their names were well known. They were instantly recognizable. And then I had a moment of clarity. I was in a bookstore in an airport, and they had all the books at the front as you walked in. And I noticed the authors' names were they were always at the top, and they were often larger than the title of the book. And it makes a lot of sense if it's Stephen King or Tom Clancy. But then some of the names I didn't recognize. And I saw that I had this instant connection that this book must be as good as Stephen King's new book because their name is 4 times the size of the title. And it's bigger than Stephen King's name. And that's when I realized I needed to move on my book covers. I needed to move my name that was tiny and at the very bottom of the cover to the top and make it at least as large as the title.
No longer incidental.
Right. And also, sometimes characters or cartoon characters for artists have a shelf life.
Yeah.
And if everybody knows this one title and then popularity fades and you come out with a new character and people don't know your name or your style, they won't connect it.
Yeah.
But if your name is your brand, then they'll go, oh, I like this
this one
previous
character.
one. I know I'm going to like this one
Yeah.
because
It's coming from the mind of that artist.
right. Like if Matt Groening does something other than The Simpsons, you'll give it a try.
Exactly. You know, when I was in college, and for years after that, I looked down on branding. I thought it was cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was like I thought it was corporate. I had so many negative feelings about it until I started getting into branding myself as a designer. And
especially in advertising, like
yeah,
the artist, it's the brand, the company's brand that's important, not who made the ad.
yeah, absolutely. And the tide is turning, and I think that really speaks to this shift in perspective that a lot of artists are coming to terms with. And the advent of the internet obviously is huge because people get to see, I mean, not only the tools are much more accessible than they were before, but they also see that other artists are doing it and they learn from that, right? But
Yeah, everybody has to be an influencer now.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, when you think about like Picasso was a brand. You know, Tony Hawk is a brand. Jay-Z is a brand. These are all artists in their own right. But they have taken their stature in their own industry and found a way to build on that with their brand. You know, so people get Jay-Z's clothes because it's Jay-Z, and that's it.
Yes. Or if Tony Hawk says, if he posts on Twitter and says, I really like this restaurant, when the next time I'm in that town, I'll be like, I got to check out that restaurant because Tony Hawk, I trust his opinion. I like his brand.
Yep. You associate him with cool.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the other benefits of doing that and becoming more industrious, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, is and going back to that word you used before, which is hustling, compiling all of these first three elements, it creates this opening inside you, which is like, what more can I learn to advance what it is that I'm trying to do? That's one of the reasons why I think you're such an encyclopedia of resource, is because this is just how your mindset works. Your mindset is. This is how your brain works. You are constantly thinking about, how can I get my brand out there more?
And there's always a better way to do something.
Right. So this steps into my fourth topic, which is, some of the practical elements, like learning what's out there to produce what you need. That would be, things that include like self-publishing, screen printing, merchandising. First of all, do you think that's incredibly important?
Yes. And also, I think paying attention to trends is extremely important.
Awesome. Talk about it.
Especially like when I'm making products. T-shirts are a good standard. For a while, round buttons there was a big market for that, but that's shifted into enamel pins. And so you have to pay attention to stuff like that. And the size of the pins also is important. Sometimes one season, people want almost brooch size pins.
Yeah.
But you don't want to get a warehouse full of those, and because the next summer people will be like, we want tiny ones.
Right. Yeah. So I guess it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but so, talking a little bit more about these practical elements of just learning, and I guess, maybe one of the most important things is just being open, right?
Right. And also, as you were saying, books, when I do conventions and festivals, books are cornerstone of my display, but that's shifting. People are reading more stuff online, and books aren't, a lot of people argue with me, but books aren't as important as they used to be.
Yeah.
A lot of it is the stuff that spins off from that.
Right.
The merchandise,
Yeah.
koozies or posters or prints.
Yeah, yeah.
You can argue, well, books are important. People have to have books, and people used to go crazy about books. And you're like, fine, you're going to have a table full of books.
Right.
And you're probably right that people do need books and should buy books.
Yeah.
But if they're not, then you're not going to make any sales. So you have to see what they're looking for.
Yeah. I love what you're saying here. I think another really important point here is to remember not to get lost in what the trends are, and make sure that you're also following your passion, right? So
Right.
time management sort of like squeezes into this in terms of the fact that make sure you're being passionate about what you're producing, but also make sure that you're following trends so that you can stay in the forefront of people who are, walking the aisles at Comic-Con, or, going into pop culture stores or online resources, right?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about time management. I mean, how do you focus on things that you're passionate about? I mean, obviously you're still making comics. You're constantly producing comic books. How do you make time for that while still making sure that you're producing things that people just want, that's not necessarily reading material?
This is like up there with coming up with ideas. It's so important. There's several ways to do it. The two main ways are, you have to decide what works for you, most importantly. And for some people, that's setting a schedule, like you're in college or you're in high school. From 8 o'clock to 9:30, I do this every day. 9:30 to 10:30, I put that away and I work on I mail stuff. Then I take a lunch break, then I come back and I work. My approach is different. I work on what needs to be done, and in big blocks. And so maybe 2 weeks is spent working on illustrations for a comic book, and then 2 weeks is spent painting. I love deadlines. Deadlines get stuff done. Conventions are great. That's the thing. Like when you're working for yourself, and if I don't have a client, the deadlines are open, but I set up a deadline. So I know if I'm doing a big convention in July, I have to have 2 new t-shirt designs, and I have to have patches made, and I have to have stickers made, and I want to have at least 1 new book, and I have to have that done 2 months before the convention so I can order the books, proof them, and then make any changes and have them in time for the convention. So I go by deadlines.
How do you make time for that? How do you make time to think through all that to make sure you're planning properly? Because obviously you've got printed stuff that needs to be sent to press. It needs time to produce, get back to you. How do you plan for that?
You just have to be aware
Yeah.
of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the simplest answer. You have to know yourself. You have to know that if you're a procrastinator, you
Right.
can't do that.
Right.
Or know your routines. Like I found when I have a huge project coming up that suddenly I have to clean the house. I have to vacuum and organize my desk and do all these things that I could have done any time, but I have to do it now. And through talking with other people and reading other artists on their thoughts on Twitter and Facebook, that's a very common thing. And then I realized it's very similar to how a dog has to turn around 3 times before they lay down. It's just something.
I do that too, by the way.
Turn around 3 times?
Before I lie down.
But I think there's science behind it. Like, if these menial tasks are taken care of, your mind can start spinning on the task ahead. Because a lot of art is really mental thoughts before you get to work. So it gives your mind time to relax and begin to focus. So when you sit down at your table or the computer or the iPad, you're ready to go.
Yeah. Let's talk about my 5th item here, which is, I've titled it Always Be Learning, but the subtext of that is learning how to not be cynical and enjoy competition.
Definitely.
So I remember one time you had told me that how the Comic-Con industry has evolved and changed, and a lot of people are frustrated with that. And that's just one small example of how people can be cynical, right? Rather than just looking at the trends, as you mentioned before, and seeing it as a fun challenge. Like, what can I do in this new sort of context or paradigm, right?
Right. Well, you can look at anything and decide, am I going to be stressed out about this or worried about it or have fun? And to me, like, the job, it has to be done anyway. So unless you really enjoy stressing or having anxiety, why do that? Find a way to make it fun while you're doing it.
Yeah. Is it as simple as that? Anything else that you do?
I think it's simple like that.
Yeah.
Because no one likes doing the dishes, but it has to be done. So make it fun. Find some way to make it fun, or else you're going to just be miserable.
Yeah. And one of the other things that you talked to me about several months ago was this idea that you love competition.
Yes.
And
it's not double-edged. It's a same edge. The internet is amazing, as everybody knows, that you can look at 100 different artists instantly.
Yeah.
The drawback is you start to look at them going, this person is amazing. I can never even think of how they came up with that. And that can lead to some depression.
Yeah.
And that happens. And then learning that artists that you admire and respect and are hugely successful have the same exact thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell you 20 other artists that are much better than they are. But you just have to keep in mind you're doing your thing.
And it doesn't matter how good they are either.
Right.
They'll still say that.
Right. And like we said before, like you do your thing. You're special in your way. You can look at them to see their new techniques or use it as inspiration. Because oftentimes somebody that you're in awe of, you'll find out that they're a huge fan of your work.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind. For me, healthy competition means staying at the top of your game.
Yeah.
Instead of coasting. Never coast. If you think somebody is better than you, they have a funnier comic book, or they have a better design sense, they took it to another level. Use that to inspire you.
Totally. You know, as you mentioned, I think every artist goes through this inferiority complex, you know, when you see these artists that you admire and then you see how many of them there are. And I think shifting it from feeling inferior or feeling like it's competition, you just look at it as inspiring and you see, wow, that's amazing. What can I learn from that, and how can I incorporate some of that into my own work?
Yes.
I think that is
that's the
huge
healthiest
shift.
That's the healthiest way to
Yeah.
to do it. Otherwise, it's going to drive you crazy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's almost like, it's funny how the perspective shifts when you feel like they're somewhat on the same level as you in terms of, you know, they're not this superstar that you've idolized since you were a kid, right? So there's almost like these two levels the way I've seen it. There are the superstars that are like have been around for decades, who are just like the masters of their craft, and then there's everybody else,
Yes.
to some degree, right? And everybody else, you always feel like you're in competition with them, rather than seeing, well, the masters, even those, like the masters that you look up to and have looked up to since you were a kid, you don't see them as your competition, right? And they are amazing and inspiring. But the ones that are down below, who could be just like, probably many of them are even more talented than the masters you admired since you were a kid. Somehow you can't see them as the same sort of inspiration as the masters, it's just a shift in perspective, right? You know, it's just really looking at like, well, these are all my peers, you know, they're doing amazing stuff and I'm inspired by them and I can just grow from that.
And also, sometimes you have to keep in mind, if you look at a painter that can paint realistic clouds and portraits or things that almost look like a photograph, you can wish that you could do it, but then you have to say to yourself, that's not what I want to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You know, I want to do simple abstract art.
Yeah.
And you just have to keep that in mind sometimes. Even though somebody is super talented, maybe they're getting the praise that you want to get, realize that's not your area. And eventually you'll get that praise. It'll come along at a different time, and that's just the way the world works.
Yeah. I feel like that runs right into number 6.
Bonus points.
Yeah. So looking at number 6 and tying into number 5 about, you know, enjoying your competition and being inspired by them, etc. I feel like when you open yourself up to that perspective, you become more humble and more excited for your own work and also for other people's work.
And definitely if someone else gets success, be happy for them.
Yes.
Even if it's the same, you're fighting for the same job. Success is so rare and you know how it feels for you. You know, let them enjoy the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. So tying into that, my number 6 is make friends and don't be an asshole.
I agree. Because you never know. Again, if they got the job that you wanted, and you're friends with them or friends with them in a social situation, they might get in too much work than they can handle, and they'll say, your style is similar. I can bring you into this. There's some way that it's going to come. The goodness will come back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is that. I think there is that element of you never know how that person's going to help you in the long run. I think that's very important. But I just also think that for your own sanity, like not even having an expectation there, but just like being a good person and being, making friends with people, people are going to be attracted to want to be, associated or doing stuff around you,
Even if it doesn't make the whole world a better place, it makes your world a better place.
Exactly. Perfect. Number 7 is a little bit more on the practical side. I'm super curious about, and I think that people will definitely want to hear about this from your perspective. Number 7 is breaking into Comic Cons. Can you talk about how you did that and how maybe that's changed over the years, and what kind of advice do you have that people can take from?
First, do stuff. Start making stuff. Stop talking about you're going to do it. Start doing it. Put together books. Go to some conventions. See what they're like. It's another idea that we had this year for a panel discussion of what to do when you get into a comic book convention. So go there, talk to as many people as you can. If you run into the organizers of the convention, if it's a small convention, say hello to them. Let them know who you are, and that also ties into branding. Get to know some of the creators. Post nice comments for them online when they post something so you get a good reputation. When you submit your stuff, and rejection is always hard. It's important to believe that they're wrong if they reject you, but learn from that. Why did they reject you? Was your book too short? Are you making a sword and sorcery book when it's a superhero convention? Then decide, do you want to do superhero stuff to fit in, to get into this convention? Or should you follow your own path and find conventions that the audience wants that genre? Once you're in the convention, once you've gotten a table.
But from a practical standpoint,
okay,
how do you get to the point of applying to get in? And how do you get
the step by step?
Yeah, sort of like, what obviously you can't just like apply and not have any products or not have any good stuff to actually have a booth for, unless I'm wrong. But, what is the sort of like, what's the normal step into getting to? I mean,
you get that when you fill out the entry form.
Yeah.
The entry form will often ask you what other conventions you've done.
Okay.
They'll definitely ask you places they can see your work online. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Snapchat. So you list all those and have a good, solid body of work for them to look at. And occasionally, some of the conventions will ask you to send in a book as a sample, so they know that you've got quality that they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell them that you're going to have a book. Don't tell them, you don't apologize to them that your Instagram page has 3 entries because you're going to have a lot more stuff. Have that stuff.
Right.
So again, it's hard without a deadline or without the promise of getting paid to create stuff, but you have to.
Yeah. What was the first Comic-Con you went to, first of all, or got a table at?
That's a good question. The first one I did was a small convention in a hotel in North Raleigh.
Okay.
And that was a learning experience. That's we was working with somebody else. We had a book together. We had books separate from each other. But we split a table.
How many tables?
One table.
No. I'm saying like how many tables at the convention?
Oh, one table. There's probably 60 people there.
Okay. So it's decent size.
It was a good mid-size convention. So our product at this convention was entertaining comic strips, some SpongeBob type stuff, and everybody wanted superhero or sword and sorcery. And people would come to our table, glance at it, and then we became an information booth, asking them what they were looking
That's
for.
the worst.
And we were like, okay, you want that table over there.
Restrooms right down, take a left on, right.
So that's where I learned to find conventions that hit your demographic. So the next one I did was SPX in Bethesda, Maryland.
Yeah.
It's a small press expo.
Yep.
And it's focused on independent artists such as myself that covers a wide variety of genres, but the thing that ties them is that they're mainly not superhero oriented.
Yeah. And it's very artist based.
Yes. And that's one is also another one you go into, and they have 200 or 300 different artists who are all the best cartoonists from their communities. And you walk in thinking you're the greatest cartoonist, and it's a room full of greatest cartoonists.
The cool thing about those spots, though, especially the smaller ones, is the ability to hang after all of the daily kind of talks, and the booths are kind of shutting down for the day. People get to kind of round tables. You got all these artists who have their own booths. They come around and everybody's drawing together. So it's a great time to get to know each other.
SPX has built their tradition on and their reputation on the fact that it's at one hotel where most everybody stays. Mm-hmm. Heroes in Charlotte, North Carolina is very similar. And everybody meets in the lobby or at the bar in the lobby. And you get to talk. And peer groups are so important because you realize what you thought was a unique struggle for yourself is a common struggle. And you also learn maybe a Photoshop trick or an app that you didn't know existed.
Or a pen.
A pen.
Right. That could change your style completely.
Yeah. And so you get this information, or you give it.
Yeah.
And you make contacts, and you learn someone might have a tip for you, or somebody might say like, yeah, I'm doing T-shirts for local restaurants in town. And you're like, I never thought I could approach a restaurant and ask them if they needed a cartoon T-shirt design.
Yeah.
So you learn a lot.
You know, what's another cool part about it too is that being an independent artist, you are spending a tremendous amount of time by yourself.
Yes.
The comic cons, especially the smaller ones where it's a little bit less intimidating and it's not as chaotic, it really gives you a chance to, especially like, a lot of artists are introverts, tend to be a little bit more introverted.
I think that's changing a lot.
I think so too, yeah. I would say so because it's becoming cooler, right? So you have a wider spectrum of people that are getting into comics.
When I started, it was very, very different.
Right.
But the pop culture market has exploded so much that you're getting, and the internet changing, like and again, tying back into being a brand, like you have to know how to sell yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sell your brand.
Yeah. So even to that point, though, going to these Comic Cons is a great way for people to bond, essentially, for artists to bond, to get together and actually like sit at a table with a group of other artists and talk shop,
right.
And like you were saying, like really talk about some of the struggles. I think that's one of the great things about being an artist is that they're not nearly as afraid to talk about the internal struggles that people have,
And to me, that's really helpful when you find out other people are having problems that you thought was unique to your situation.
Yes.
To learn that that's a expected thing.
Yeah.
And that there's ways around it.
Yeah. I kind of have a hard time like envisioning a convention of physicians having the same sort of cathartic discussions.
But I'm sure they do. Like,
Yeah, that's a good point. True. Um, so anyway, you were saying so you started a little bit smaller and it
started
gets bigger.
smaller,
You
and
start,
then people recommended other conventions that were bigger,
yeah,
and I started doing those, and the world just starts getting wider and wider.
yeah, awesome. And now you've been doing Comic Cons for quite a while now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
So
And you're even doing this San Diego Comic Con still. You've been doing that for years.
yeah, and this is where like the student becomes the teacher cliche. My table neighbor last year had never done a comic book convention, and he is a ceramic artist that makes pieces of his characters and then takes them to locations in Oakland where he lives and photographs them and makes graphic novels based on that. And he's very successful in Oakland. He has a great reputation and had the same expectations for doing a comic book show. Mm-hmm. What happened though was, one, people didn't know him in San Diego. Two, he didn't hit on topics that appealed to
that
the
audience.
One of the reasons he's successful in Oakland was he used locations that were popular. So if somebody sees the book and they're not familiar with his character, they're still like, I like that park, I like that bridge. And he did not connect with people. His work did not connect with people last year. This year, he tried a few new things, and he dressed his characters as superheroes, and he had them have a more superhero-centric adventure. He also had different products besides the books that could appeal to people, and had a much better show.
Awesome.
So I can't wait to see what he does next year.
Yeah, that's great. I want to talk a little bit about finances and budgeting and stuff like that. I think obviously when you're an independent artist or if you're an entrepreneur, keeping track of your money when it's fluctuating all the time is tricky.
Very.
Can you speak to this a little bit and how you navigate those waters?
Okay. Well, from a business perspective, you also have to look at how that affects your artwork. There may be a project that you want to work on that doesn't have a lot of mass appeal, even though it's very personal to you. And sometimes you have to realize you can't do that. You have to do a character or a story or design that you know is going to bring in the revenue. Mm-hmm. And what I do, and a lot of people will say, don't sell out, or you're selling out, or something to that effect. What I like to do is, and you never know what is going to really take off with people. And usually it's the idea that you had the least expectations of. But when it hits, realize that and be able to pivot.
Can you give an example?
My Batman on a unicorn image was an offhand comment that somebody made at a convention that Batman was always grim and depressed. And we were talking what would make Batman happy. And my idea was a unicorn ride would make Batman very happy. And as we were talking, I just made on a scratch piece of paper, I made a doodle. Didn't think much of it. Got home from the convention. I was going through paperwork and stuff, and I saw that image, and so I scanned it and I put it on. I cleaned it up a little and put it on Instagram and Facebook, and it took off. And so I knew, and then I started making t-shirts, I made stickers, I've made paintings of it, and it's been a big hit. And that big hit allows me to spend a little bit of time on a project that's more personal to me, that might not have that big of an audience. So
part of that obviously is always being in tune to potential, right?
for business
Yeah.
reasons, yeah. And know that you're going to have to do stuff you don't like to do, and which goes to the 75% of running a business.
Yeah. Another great example is the man versus liver that we
Yeah.
talked about at the last podcast. That was an incidental thing that just happened to catch fire, but it would have never happened had you not caught on to that little sliver of possible inspiration, right?
And that's a thing. Talk to a lot of artists. Sure, you go through it constantly. The idea that you spend hours and hours and hours on is well accepted. And then sometimes there's an idea that you had in 30 seconds and it takes off, and it's frustrating sometimes because you want people to appreciate the thing that you put a lot of effort into. And in some ways, or in reality, it didn't take you 30 seconds to come up with that idea. It's really a lifetime of experiences that enabled you to have this thought and to create it instantly, or seemingly instantly. So you have to be aware of that. But also, I'm a believer in these instant ideas come from your subconscious, which is very clean, unfiltered, unedited, and that's what people are responding to.
Yeah.
And a lot of pop songs, really any pop song that you can think of years later, because it's catchy and it comes from that subconscious, most of them were written under 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Yeah. It's so fascinating how that happens. You're 100% right. In my own life, in my own career, I can't tell you how many times it's always been that one sketch that it took me 8 seconds to do, that I knew that was
right.
That was the one, but I said, well, let me try and enhance it. Let me make it a little bit, and it always fucks it up.
You can spend 3 more hours on it.
Yeah.
And then you come back to that first one.
Yeah.
But you have to try.
Yep.
The lesson for new artists, like, you have to try. That's not wasted time because you're going to apply that to something else later on. But you have to be aware and smart enough to say, even though this was easy, it's the one.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing about business, is just making smart decisions. And maybe you want to make a vinyl figure of your character, but you're going to pay a sculptor to do it unless you know how to do it. Manufacturing, even if you go to China, there's a minimum of how many you can order, and that's about a $20,000 investment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to get packaging, and then you have to get distribution, and it's a amazing dream, and maybe you can get it going on Kickstarter, but if you can't, then it's not a good business decision.
Yeah.
Until you've built the market for that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
So sometimes you can't do the fun things that you wanted. Like, you have to, there's better investment for that $20,000 to $30,000.
Yep. But that's okay,
Yeah. And you'll get there.
Yep. Awesome. Last point, which I think rolls right in from this last one here, and also it's kind of a mark of how you work as an artist yourself too, which is taking Nike's advice. It's amazing how powerful that tagline is. Just do it.
And that's why it's lasted so long.
Yeah, absolutely. It really resonates.
Right. Stop talking about doing it and do it.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why people don't do it is just largely because of fear. They don't want to. They're worried about a negative outcome, essentially.
And life is complicated too. You have to, you can't always do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people. Right now, Burning Man is happening in Nevada, and I've been to that. And a lot of people have this moment out there of time is short. I don't like my job. I'm talking for 8 years that I'm going to leave my job. And they're inspired out there. You can find inspiration wherever you need it. But if you don't take that chance, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's another cliche. It's better to try and fail than not to try.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's what inspired me to leave my day job, because I realized I could stick at that I could stay at that job. I could have a good career, and then I'd be retiring, and there'd be somebody working under me that was a cartoonist, and I would say something to them like, oh, I used to be pretty good at cartoons, and they'd be, sure thing, old man. Mm-hmm. That's why you've got this job. And like, I took that chance. I saved my money, studied what I needed to do, and took the chance, and it worked.
Yeah.
But it could have been very easy not to take that chance.
Yeah. I think in general, taking the chance is, if you look at it from the perspective of every success or failure is a teachable moment.
Exactly.
I think that is incredibly important.
Yeah.
You're always going to be able to learn from your mistakes. I mean, I've just, in my path, I've realized that the more I get myself out there and just do a project that somebody invites me to do, I actually wind up enjoying the process more, just knowing that, well, I'll do it, and if it's not necessarily going to be a failure because I'm attempting it,
right.
And then I can go back and see what did I learn.
You've done the same thing, and it's a great feeling.
Yeah.
And also, one of my personal cliches is I'm working harder for myself than I would be for somebody else. And if I was working this hard for somebody else, I would hate it.
Yeah.
But I love it doing it for me because it's for me, and I'm getting to tell the stories that I want to tell.
Yeah. That's a great way to close this out, man. Paul, as always, I love your work, and I just, not only that, man, but I think you're a great human being, and I think Raleigh and the comic industry is lucky to have you, and I'm eternally grateful for all the wisdom and resources you've provided. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, man. So hopefully we'll do this again soon. Okay.
Love it.
Okay, man. Take care. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a Leadhead. And we're out.